First, his work on so-called demand systems. Second, for his work linking consumption and income at the aggregate as well as at the individual level. And finally, for his work on measuring and understanding living standards and poverty in developing countries. And I thought I'll take a few moments then to go through these three core contributions. Starting with demand system. And let's start with an example. Let's think of a government that plans to increase the VAT on food. Presumably, or hopefully, we would like that government then to find out which social groups will gain and which social group will lose, and how large are the gains and how large are the losses. But in order to determine that, we need to determine how consumption of various goods and services change in response to the reform. And in order to determine that, we need to know how prices and incomes and changes in prices and incomes affect individuals' consumption decisions. That is, we need to estimate a so-called demand system. Research on demand system has a long history in economics, but it was not until 1980 and the introduction of the so-called almost ideal demand system by Angus, Deaton and co-authors that we had the first system that managed to accurately capture real-world demand patterns. So this system and later improvements to it are nowadays standard tool to study the effects of economic policy, but also an important tool in research to understand, for instance, how to compare living standards across countries or within countries over time. Second core contribution deals with the links between consumption and income. And let's start with again with an example. Think about fiscal policy or stabilization policy. Then traditionally, our focus has been on aggregate variables. However, the process through which these aggregate variables is determined actually takes place at the individual level. And failure to take that into account and estimate models at the aggregate level can actually yield the wrong results. This, in essence, is the so-called Deaton paradox. But Deaton not only uncovered a paradox, he also pointed towards a solution to that paradox. And as the picture here illustrated, the key to understanding this paradox is to look closer at the process of average or aggregate income. Because it is in fact so that incomes of individuals fluctuate in a very different way than average income. At some given time period, some individuals get a positive income shock, some other individuals get a negative income shock, and when you look at the average or you aggregate these numbers, most of these changes averages away. So the solution or resolving the Deaton paradox is to study consumption at the individual level, the relationship between consumption and income at the individual level, and thereafter aggregate up to the national level. And this insight, that is the importance of studying individual behavior in order to understand important aggregate outcomes, has been an insight that has had long and lasting influence in modern economic macroeconomics. Final contribution deals with measuring living standards and poverty in developing countries. And again, let me give you an example. So in principle, it's an easy task to measure poverty in a low-income country. You start by determining a poverty line, and then you simply count the number or the share of individuals with either an income level or a consumption level below that poverty line. In practice, however, it is a difficult problem. So while we might have good expenditure data at our disposal, we typically do not know the prices and the quality of the goods that these households have consumed. So in work that have had a large impact on actual policy, poverty measurement in many developing countries, Deaton showed a way to overcome this problem. In other work, he has focused more on understanding world poverty and among other things, he has showed how to account for the increase of nearly 500 million poor, as reported in one of the World Bank's latest update. And more generally, Deaton has showed that our measure of world poverty at a given point in time is very sensitive to the assumption made to come up with these numbers. Finally, let me say a few words about the overall themes and impact. As I hopefully have shown, Deaton's research spans many different aspects of consumption, but there are also a number of common denominators. One is his desire to bridge theory and data. A second, as the picture there tries to illustrate, is his desire to bridge individual behavior and aggregate outcomes. That is, in order to understand important aggregate outcomes, we need to look closer and understand individual behavior. And these insights have had a large influence on microeconomics, macroeconomics, and maybe in particular development economics. His research has also had a large influence on practical policy making.